it's best to start from the very beginning. It's in 2007, and I'm in A1C, and I'm in Security Forces Technical School at Lackland Air Force Base. I am a yellow rope for our flight, and Jacob, he was talking in formation. So I pulled his 341 for talking, and of course, I guess that was his invitation to talk to me even more and ask me out on some dates. So we did the typical dating in technical school, you know, going to dinner at the dining facility, doing our laundry together, those kind of things. And we fell in love. And we decided we wanted to spend the rest of our life together. So we got married, and we got orders to Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho. We arrived at Mountain Home Air Force Base, and soon after we found out that we were expecting a child. We also found out that he was set to deploy to Iraq. So Jacob left about a few months into my pregnancy, and he returned 3 months after I had Cole. When he returned, he didn't have the best reintegration with the family. While he was gone, I matured, I became a mother, my priorities had changed. But he didn't get that same experience. He came back, and he was still living in his young 20-year-old ways. He didn't learn how to become a dedicated father. And so he continued on his young behavior, going out with his friends, drinking and having fun, partying. After a few months, I remember a specific situation that happened. He came home and it was drunk, and it was dark, and it was the night, and we were sitting in a corner on the floor in our dining room. And he's saying like he doesn't want to end up like his father. His father was an alcoholic, and he was actually killed in a bar fight. So he wanted to stop that cycle. And so we worked together as a team to help battle that addiction to alcohol. But unfortunately, those efforts were soon interrupted because it was time for us to deploy. So we geared up for our deployment, we went to training, and then when we were about to leave, we got told that the mission that we were going to conduct, we couldn't get clearance. So they sent us back to Mountain Home to wait for further instruction. So when we got back, of course, he went back to his ways, and he was hanging out with his friends and drinking. On August 18th, 2008, I was at home with my 10-month-old son, and I was laying in bed, and I was texting Jacob asking, "Where are you? Are you coming home? What are you doing?" And I didn't get any replies. A little while longer, I heard a helicopter coming over my house, and it just sunk in. I knew something was wrong. A few minutes passed, and I got a call from a paramedic. She says that Jacob is alive, but he's in critical condition, and he's being life-flighted to the Boise Hospital. So I immediately called my supervisor, still a very good friend to this day, and asked him for his support. His wife watched my son while me and him, we went to Boise to go see Jacob in the hospital. When I arrived, I couldn't ever imagine seeing somebody in that condition. He had broken his right hip. He had road rash all over his body. His right hand was broken. He slashed the backside of his knee and severed the nerve that controls your foot. And of course, blood, tar, dirt, everything was still on him. It was very shocking to see him in that condition. But what was even more shocking was to find out what happened. That night, he went out drinking with his friends, and he decided he would get on his motorcycle and go for a ride. He was sitting at a red light in town, and he saw a cop car sitting in the gas station parking lot. And he decided it would be a good idea to rev his engine and get the cop's attention to see if he would follow him. Well, if you can imagine, that's exactly what the cop did. He started chasing after him, and the chase ended up on the interstate. It is dark, Jacob is drunk, and he's going really fast. He tried to go around a van, but he ended up clipping the back side of the van and went flying. So the next few weeks, we're in the hospital. He's got a few surgeries. He's recovering, going to physical therapy. I'm still working 12-hour shifts, taking care of my son, and I have to drive 45 minutes per way to go visit him every day. After 3 weeks, he was released from the hospital, and it was now my duty to take care of him. On the way home from that hospital, I got a phone call from my leadership that said I was deploying. If you can imagine, what am I supposed to do? Like, at that point, I felt defeated. Nobody was there for me. Who was going to take care of my family while I was gone? Every time I asked, why do I have to go? They said, it's your time. You have to go. It's your duty. Again, my supervisor was there to the rescue. He told me about the humanitarian assignment program, and if I submitted paperwork, I could get stay home for a full year. No deployments, no temporary duties, or I won't PCS. So that's exactly what I did. Against all leadership's advice and warnings, I got all the required documents and submitted it. And it took 3 days for the Air Force Personnel Center to reply back and say that your humanitarian has been accepted. So for that year, I got to spend time with my family, focus on his health, taking him into his medical appointments, and of course, dealing with all the ramifications from him getting a DUI. As that time progressed, he started becoming addicted to prescription medicines. He had a very addictive personality style. So before the accident, it was alcohol. After the accident, it became prescription medicine. And then after that, we battled that and we got that resolved. But then he became really addicted to sex. It started out with just porn. But then that wasn't enough. It wasn't satisfying. So he turned to reality. And I found some photos, naked photos, on his phone of females that I knew that I worked with, as well as wives of my coworkers. So I thought it would be best, tell these women that their photos are out there. And so when I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers about it, she said, well, yours is out there too. Jacob, the one I'm supposed to trust the most, released my naked photo. And now, I didn't feel safe at work. The way that people were looking at me, my self-confidence was just destroyed. So I reached out to SARC and I reached out to chaplains, but it turned out the best way to go was with my commander. He was very supportive, and he gave a statement to the entire squadron that said the next person that shares this photo will receive an Article 15. And so that kind of squashed it. They moved me into a section where I'm kind of away from everybody, but I can still work and do my job. A few months passed, and it's finally time for me to deploy. I deployed in 2010, and during those 8 months gone, life was pretty good. There was no drama. But when I returned, all those problems reemerged. His addictive personality style came back full force, and this time he was addicted to me. He was very controlling. I wasn't allowed to see any friends. I wasn't allowed to take a nap on the couch. He also forced me to have sex with him whenever he wanted. That's when I knew I had to get out. So I sought out some counseling and tried to figure out the best way to start this divorce. I relied on my best friend, and we started the process. Now, just like our very rocky marriage, you can only imagine the divorce was just as much of a disaster. We argued, we fought. He tried to ruin my personal and professional life any way that he could. Luckily, the people that I were working with, they were very supportive and understanding. They protected me. They would tell me if he was coming to base so he wouldn't try to harm me. And they let me have time off when I had to go to court for our custody battle. Finally, the divorce ended, and he went back to North Carolina, and I PCS'd here to Dyess. Those past few years, since we've been separated and divorced, his life continued to go downhill. He never really fully recovered his self-confidence from the accident, so he was on antidepressant medication, and he battled the thought of suicide quite a bit. Like I said, where he was living, it was in a bad neighborhood, frequent break-ins, so you don't know if anybody could have harmed him at any time. He also returned back to drinking alcohol, and he started taking drugs. That's probably not the best way to try to recover from a big incident like that, turning to drugs and alcohol. But he thought that was the best way. And so that's where we are today. We don't know what happened. He was 31 years old, and on his death certificate, it says pending. So now for the future, my focus is on my son. I have to break that cycle. I have to. Knowing the demons that he could possibly have to fight later in his life, I have to be ahead of the game. I have to be there for him. Now, I don't want you guys to feel sorry for me. I really don't, because I don't feel sorry for me. I have taken this experience, I have learned from it, and I have grown. I am a better person today, and my life is better than it has ever been. And I am thankful that even though that these experiences were negative, they made me a better person. Thank you.
I wanted to preface some of my current struggles with a little bit of my background and kind of what brought me into the Air Force. So, growing up, I didn't have a very stable life. My father was an alcoholic for probably before I was born, and he was also addicted to prescription pain medication because he had back problems. I don't remember very many days that I didn't see him drunk or high. They were few and far between. So it was really just that loss of childhood and that loss of innocence when you were trying to be a parent to your parent, because they can't be a parent to you and they can't take care of themselves. He passed away when I was 12. He had an accidental overdose on a fentanyl pain patch that was prescribed to him by a doctor. He was also drinking alcohol that night, as far as we know. It was very tragic, but in a weird way, it was that momentary relief, that moment of freedom and finally getting to be my own person that could do my own thing. But about a year and a half after that, my mom and I moved from Iowa to North Carolina. My two older siblings were living there, so we wanted to be close to the family. And the younger of those siblings ended up moving in with us shortly afterwards. And unfortunately, he was also an addict. He had done probably every drug under the sun in the 16 years that he was doing that. And he proceeded to decline. He eventually called a crisis counselor because he was going to kill himself. And that was when he went to rehab. He has now been sober for 7 years, so I thank God that even though I had to go through that experience again, we were able to save his life. But the move was really hard for me, between dealing with him and trying to go to a new school where I just didn't fit in. I was not accepted, I was bullied quite a bit, and it made me very vulnerable and exceedingly vulnerable to people that had ill intent for me. And throughout my junior and senior year, I was raped 3 times. So that was very difficult to try to process. It took me years to process that and to accept that those things had happened to me, because I didn't want to believe that these people were as awful as they were. But all of those things kind of pushed me to be better and to do something better with my life, and it really pushed me to join the Air Force. I wanted to do something that would give me that stability and that structure. I didn't really want to go to college even though I was smart, because I didn't fit into that kind of party-hardy lifestyle. That was never my thing, especially with my father, and so I wanted something that was structured, and I wanted more than anything a place that I could belong. that I felt like I mattered and that I was doing something bigger than me. And so I joined, and that was the best decision of my entire life. I never expected to be good at it. I mean, I'm a little 5'2" petite thing that's not the most physically empowering, but I pushed myself to be good at it because I wanted it more than anything. And I actually really excelled in my career. I got various accolades, senior airman below the zone, and I made staff first-time testing. So that was huge for me. That really boosted my confidence so much and made me the person that I am now and the stronger person that I am now. But unfortunately, with the good comes some of the bad. At the end of last year, kind of started middle of last year when I came back from a deployment, I got divorced. I had several failed relationships after that, so I was starting to feel really just lonely and empty and kind of wondering, God, why me? What's wrong with me? Why can't I be good enough for somebody? I had given myself work overload because I'm a perfectionist and I like to take everything on, and I hate to admit when I can't do it all. Even though I know I can't be Wonder Woman, I really want to be Wonder Woman, so I have a very hard time with that. And right around beginning of February last year, both of my siblings got sick at the same time. So I was struggling to deal with that and figure out how I could be there for them. I knew I didn't want to necessarily go home yet, but it was still that moment of just guilt and wondering how I could be there for them and feeling like I had failed them. And it really culminated Valentine's Day of this year. I had a really hard day at work. All of the stress was just kind of hitting me like this tidal wave, and it was so overwhelming, and I felt like I just had absolutely no way out of it. I didn't know what to do or how to feel better, and I went home with the thought in mind that I didn't want to do this anymore, that I didn't want to be here anymore. I remember going straight to my couch. I didn't even take my uniform off. I just laid on my couch for several hours, just physical shutdown. And mentally, my head just kept going through all the ways that I could end my life and all the reasons why the world would be better without me in it and all the things that I had failed at. But eventually, my mind started to change, and I started to think about reasons why I should be here. I thought about my mom, because I knew she wouldn't keep going without me. I thought about a suicide prevention briefing we'd had and someone that shared his story with us, and I thought maybe if he could do it and get better from it, that I could do the same. And I finally came to the decision to text my supervisor, and I told her I will not be at work in the morning, I will be going to mental health. A friend came over and helped me get off the couch, get out of my uniform, and another stayed the night with me so I wouldn't have to go sit in the emergency room overnight. And the next morning I went in as soon as they opened and self-admitted, which was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done. I've been to mental health before, but never for anything like that. And it's hard to sit there with this whirlwind of emotions and try to put them in numbers on a scale, because they want to know, well, how intense are these feelings? How is this? And you can't even figure out what you're feeling, let alone try to quantify it. But it was a very good thing. Through continued counseling, I was diagnosed with depression. And anybody in this room that has depression or knows somebody that has depression knows that it is a daily struggle. It does not stop as much as you might want it to. There are days that are better and you feel like you can take on the world, and there are days that just getting out of bed in the morning is the hardest thing you're going to do all day. And it's especially difficult for me because I always want to give 100%. I want to be the best person I can be, but sometimes I have to remind myself that I can't do that and that that's okay. That some days I only have maybe 80% or 60%, but that just getting out of bed and continuing to put my feet one foot in front of the other is the best thing that I can do right now. But kind of still trying to move forward from that. I do go to counseling once a week. I got pulled for ALS about a month after I started my counseling, which was a blessing in disguise for me. There were plenty of days that it was frustrating because I couldn't continue to go to my counseling, but it was this huge distraction to just throw all of myself into physically and mentally, and something to just push for and to keep pushing for. And I actually walked away with distinguished graduate. I also did training to be a SAPR victim advocate, and while I'm not active right now, I look forward in the future to being able to help other people who have been through what I have and to give them that voice of belief that nobody gave to me. I also write letters for an organization called Letters Against Depression, which you can submit your name and just give a little brief story, and somebody will pick you up and write you a little letter of hope and encouragement and just remind you that you're not alone in the world. And the biggest thing for me has been learning how to talk about it, because there were so many things that happened to me that I'd never shared because I thought, these things are private. They're not things people want to hear. They're awful things, but I had my voice taken away from me so many times, and it's learning to stop letting people take my voice away from me and to not be silenced anymore. I hope that something I said reached some of you out here and just reminded you that you're not alone in whatever you're going through. And I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day.
I don't know what possessed me to get in the car. I by no means thought I was okay to drive, but I did. And about 15 minutes later, about a mile from my house, I slammed my car into an electrical pole, a fence, and then ended up into a tree. The only thing I remember from that, I remember the impact, and I remember someone asking me if I was okay, and I said yes. And then the next thing I know, the next morning, I woke up in the Taylor County Jail, arrested for a DUI, and my supervision picking me up to take me home. I didn't remember where my accident happened. I didn't remember what condition my car was in. I could barely remember anything. The next day, a friend of mine came with me to the tow company that took my truck, and we walked in, and I said, "Hey, I'm here to clear out the Trailblazer." And there was a guy in the back behind me, kind of a peanut gallery fellow, and he said, "Oh, good thing you weren't in that car." I said, "Oh, yeah, I was driving that car." And that's when it kind of hit me. I was like, well, I guess this was pretty bad, but it didn't. I felt okay, so I didn't think anything of it until I saw the car, and the front was pretty much split down the middle all the way to the windshield. And I don't really know how I walked away from it, but we'll fast forward 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later I was home and I was trying to check myself. I never went to the hospital that night, so I wanted to make sure there was nothing going on, no broken bones, no internal bleeding anywhere, and I came across a pretty significant lump in my left breast. And the next day, I went to the flight doc to have her take a look at it, and she said, "Yeah, it seems pretty suspicious. We should have you at least go get a mammogram." So I went for a mammogram a couple days later. They said, "Yep, very suspicious. We're gonna have you get an ultrasound." I got an ultrasound. They said, "Yeah, we're gonna have you get a biopsy." This was all in a matter of a week and a half or so. I went for the biopsy, and they told me I would get my results in 3 days. It took 12 days, so the suspense was killing me. Monday through Friday, so about 6.5 weeks, every day. The best way to describe it would be you going to the beach and getting sunburnt, and then having to go and lay on the beach the very next day, every day, for 6 weeks. After a while, it just became very tan looking and very tender, like a sunburn would. But that was probably the easiest part of everything, so I couldn't even complain. So to this day, I finished radiation about a month and a half ago, but I still get treatments every 3 weeks. I'll do that until November, and then they will start me. They want to start giving me shots to keep me in menopause, to keep my estrogen levels down, which is, I guess, what was the cause of my cancer, an overproduction of estrogen, which is ironic in a way. So after all is said and done, after all this is complete, I will have done over 50 hours of chemotherapy, 3 surgeries, 33 rounds of radiation, and I feel fantastic. I can't say that every day was a good day. Most days were very good. There were days that I woke up crying, praying that today would go faster than the last day, that today would be better than the last day. And I just remember my mom telling me all the time, every day she said, tomorrow's gonna get better, you already know that. Just let's get through today. What can we do today to make you feel better? And that's what I did. So bringing it back to my original battle, was the August 21st the best day of my life or the worst day of my life? Obviously, I would never justify what happened that night, my mistake that night, with, well, it saved my life with cancer. But I will say that had that accident not happened, I don't know how long I would have gone without finding that myself. I don't check myself as often as I should. Having found it when I did and already being stage 2, I don't know how far along I would have been whenever I did find it myself or through the flight doc eventually. So if I leave you with anything, it's don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't think you're invincible. Don't make a plan after you've already started drinking or you're halfway through the night. Make the plan before you leave the house. And then as far as everything else, just like anything in life, tomorrow will be a better day. If you can just get through today, you'll be all right. And that's how I got through everything.
Little did I know that of all the places in the world we could have been sent, we were sent to Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. Abilene? Where's that? I grew up in Texas, and I've never even heard of that place. I never knew I would come to call this place home. So we got married, moved to Dyess. We had our share of good times and bad, happy and sad, TDYs, deployments, and being apart for months on end. So shortly into our marriage, I had started down the difficult path of becoming a realtor. Went several months having to rely on her income alone, and that was a lot of added stress on our young marriage. We had nearly got divorced when times were hard, but it was a motorcycle that brought us back together again. During college, Leanne had to get rid of her motorcycle, and then my motorcycle was stolen while she was in basic training. During her last deployment, when we had the toughest time as a couple, I bought another motorcycle. I had no idea it was also that motorcycle that would tear us apart. But we had the best time together, riding that bike, her holding on to me as we rode around town through the hill country. Eventually, I bought another motorcycle so we could both ride together like we did when we first started dating. We rode every weekend, any chance we could really. Even started doing track days where we'd get special instruction on the proper way to ride these motorcycles. June 6, 2015, my life was changed forever. That week started out just like any other week. Leanne was eager, always talking about how badly she wanted to go ride that weekend. So we set something up with our group of friends. We often rode on a local windy hill country road, often referred to as the Merkle Run. We'd done this road millions of times. It was a very well-known route that we would go ride. We had set it up for a Saturday morning, June 6th. The two of us and two of our friends, Michael and Sean, we all decided to go out and ride together. Little did I know how valuable Michael and Sean's presence would be on this ride in particular. So Saturday morning came around. I went through my normal procedure, checking the bikes, making sure the tires had enough air in them, checking the chain, making sure nothing was wrong, getting them warmed up. And then we head to the local spot we would always meet up, the gas station at 277 in Rebecca, just off base. We were late, as usual, and we just quickly put gas in the bikes, didn't even take our helmets off, and said a few words to each other and bumped the front of our helmets together as if it was a kiss. Little did I know that would be a kiss goodbye. I wish I'd have taken off my helmet. The two others that joined us that day were a bit more experienced than Leanne. They would lead the way, followed by me, then Leanne. I'd keep up with the guys through the corners, while Leanne stayed back, going slower, working on her body position that she'd recently learned at our most recent track day. The roads would usually have several good corners, followed by a long straight. I'd chase after the guys through the corners, slow down, waiting for Leanne to catch up. I'd always try to watch out for her when we rode together, but her stubbornness would never allow me to follow directly behind her to keep a better eye on her. After a few straights where she'd catch back up, we came to another long straightaway. I felt something wasn't right. I had slowed to a crawl, eventually stopped, waiting for her to catch up to me, waiting for her to come around that last corner. There was nothing. I took off my helmet trying to see if I could hear her motorcycle in the distance. Still nothing. My heart sank. I knew something was wrong, but I was still optimistic. I thought maybe she took a wrong turn somewhere or pulled over to adjust the music she was listening to or take a phone call. So I turned around. I headed back the way we came. I was looking on the sides of the road, checking down any side streets, trying to see any sign of her or her motorcycle. I came to another long straightaway, and then I really started to get worried. I knew at that point she was previously right behind me. My heart was racing and I was terrified. I knew she had to have crashed, but I had no idea where she was. I pulled off, parked back, tried calling her cell phone several times with no answer. I was losing my mind. I turned around again, rode back through that last section of windy corners, with my helmet removed, standing up on the foot pegs of my motorcycle, looking through for any sign of her in the tall grass on the sides of the road. Finally, I saw something black and mangled in the ditch off the left side of the road. I thought it was an old bicycle somebody had dumped, but when I got closer, I realized it was her motorcycle. I parked in the gravel driveway right near where her bike was, getting off my bike so fast I nearly dropped it myself, putting the kickstand down. I was horrified to find her bike, but no sign of her. I started screaming, calling her name, pushing through the tall grass looking for her, when finally I heard a very faint, "I'm over here," coming from about 50 feet away from where her bike was. She was conscious, but obviously hurting. Her leg was bent up behind and underneath her. Her helmet looked destroyed, but she was still talking and moving. Her words didn't make very much sense, but she obviously wanted her helmet removed. She couldn't move her right arm at all, so I helped her take off her helmet. Just then, my two friends showed up, and just in time too. Michael was retired, active duty military. He was previously a medic. Sean was currently active duty military, worked in her shop, knew her commander, knew who to call. I was so in shock, but they were there to help, calling 911 as Michael and I tried to keep her from passing out. Still stubborn as hell, she screamed "no" as I wouldn't let her go to sleep, asking her questions, keeping her awake. She was still fighting hard. I really thought she would be okay. A few minutes later, the ambulance showed up, and then they put her on board, started treating her right away. A few minutes after that, the helicopter showed up to take her. I left her bike there, rode my motorcycle home to go grab some things to take to her while she's in the hospital. Phone charger, stuff like that, toothbrush, deodorant, things that I figured, oh, she'll be okay. She'll probably want these things, the next couple days. The whole time I was thinking to myself, Leanne's tough. This is going to be cake. I'm the crazy one who crashes. I was always the one who would get speeding tickets and crash motorcycles and, do dumb things. She was always the safe one. She had never crashed a bike prior to this. As soon as I got everything together for her, I got a call that she had coded during the flight to the hospital. I never knew what that meant before, but I did that day. I jumped in the truck, drove over there as fast as I could, called her parents, told her mom and dad that Leanne was in a serious accident and you need to get to Abilene as quickly as you can. I knew at this point that this accident was much more serious than I had originally imagined. Once I got there, I was greeted by one of her COs and the chaplain. We cried together and prayed together as they tried to get Leanne stable, fearing brain damage or worse. We soon got word there was no brain damage, but a severed artery in her right arm, and she would require a special neurosurgeon to get patched up at a hospital in Lubbock. So another helicopter ride for Leanne. A friend of ours who also worked in her shop, Peter, he volunteered to take some time off work. They approved his leave, and he drove us to Lubbock. Every 30 minutes on that ride, I was calling, asking for an update, but they couldn't give me any more information other than when they finally got her there and into surgery. At the same time, her parents were calling me about every 30 minutes, asking if I knew anything new. By the time I got there, it was just barely too late. The doctor took me into a private room, told me that during the flight from Abilene to Lubbock, she coded 3 more times, but they were able to revive her. And then during the operation, she coded once more, and they weren't able to bring her back this time. At this point, I started ignoring the calls from her family. I didn't want to tell them over the phone that their eldest daughter had just passed away. A few minutes later, they arrived, met them in the parking lot. I didn't even have to say it to them. We just all started crying together, her mom screaming painful screams of a mother who just lost a child. It was the worst pain I have ever felt. They gave us a few minutes to grieve together there in the hospital, and then they took us back to see her. There was more crying, a lot more crying actually, and then they took us to a hotel for the night. It was probably 2 weeks later, we had our service here on base at Dyess in the movie theater. It was packed, standing room only, overflowing into the lobby and outside. I had never felt so loved by people I've never met myself. It was amazing to see all the people who she had had a positive impact on during her short career at Dyess Air Force Base. Losing Leanne was the greatest pain I had ever felt. I didn't go back to work for months, could hardly leave the house, and I had many negative coping mechanisms I had to overcome myself. A few short weeks after Leanne's accident, my family had decided to keep our plans that we had made to go to a lake house they rented out every year. We had planned to go all together, Leanne, me, the dogs, all my brothers, my mom and dad. Obviously that couldn't happen the way we had planned. But they convinced me to still join them and go down there to Austin. We had only been there at the lake house for a few days when we got a call. My grandma, she was in the hospital in San Antonio, and the doctor said she was not going to make it more than a night in the hospital. I couldn't go through that grief again so soon. I couldn't go in a hospital again. Everything was still so fresh. I was still crying myself to sleep every night. So I stayed back at the lake house in Austin and had a few friends drive down from Abilene to come stay with me in that house so I wouldn't have to be alone. A few days later, we went home. I remember that drive home still to this day. I had been starting to do a little better, not crying during the day, still able to do the things I needed to do. But this particular drive, it was the first long road trip that I'd gone on without Leanne in years. I broke down. I had to pull over, I was crying so hard. I knew I needed help, but I didn't want to admit it. My dad had taken all of this pretty hard too, losing his first daughter-in-law, losing his mom. After Grandma passed away, Chuck, my dad, he had to be the sole provider and caretaker for his disabled sister. The grief and stress of all these events was starting to affect his work. His company started losing money, and that just added more stress and anxiety onto my dad. He soon became depressed, suicidal, even attempted suicide, and was placed in a mental hospital for a few days. All they did was load him up on some prescription medications and send him home packing. Those medicines were not the help that he needed. My mom, in the meantime, was hiding all of this from me. I didn't learn of any of this until after exactly how bad it was. She knew I was still fragile. She didn't want me to, hurt any more than I already was. So she wouldn't fill me in. She wouldn't tell me all these details. On December 2nd, my life changed again. It was 2 in the morning. I woke up to a really loud on my side door at my house. And it's Texas. If someone bangs on your door at 2 in the morning, you're going to go answer the door with a pistol in your hand or a shotgun or something. So there I was in my boxers holding a pistol. I go up to that door, and since they were at the door with no peephole, I said through the door, "Who is it?" Like, "Sir, it's the Abilene Police Department." I was confused. What the hell are the cops doing at my house at 2 in the morning? What did I do wrong? Am I going to jail? I asked again, really, who is it? And they said, sir, it's the Abilene Police Department. So I go look out one of the windows on the side of the house, and sure enough, there's a squad car outside. I said, I better go put this away. So I quickly ran, put the gun back in the cabinet, and I opened the door for the police. They asked if I was Remy LaCascio. Of course, yes, that's me. They asked if they can come in and speak with me. And it was at that point when I knew, okay, I'm not in trouble, but I knew something was seriously wrong. They asked me to sit down on the couch, and they just told me sternly, sir, earlier this evening around 7 p.m., your father murdered your mother. What? I had no idea, never would have in a million years seen this coming. My dad had never laid hand on my mom. I can't even remember the last time I heard them have an argument. It was totally out of left field. Everything that night and the next few days was a blur. Since I was the eldest son, I was the point of contact. I had to call my mom's brothers, her dad, my siblings. I had to be the one to bear all that news to everybody. Everybody had the same reaction I did. What? Nobody could believe it. Nobody saw it coming. So it was within a 6-month period. I had lost 3 women who were a major part of my life. I was beaten, but not broken. I got back to work for the first time in 6 months as soon as I got back from San Antonio. 2016 was literally a growth of 5 times over my previous year's business. I was instantly one of the top 10 real estate agents in Abilene, Texas. I poured everything I had into my job and the gym. I had to keep myself busy 24/7. I never stopped. I was always busy doing something. If I wasn't doing something, I would be alone with my thoughts and I'd be sad. Shortly into the year, one of my close friends realized all the negative things I was doing to help occupy my time. I had both good coping mechanisms and bad, but my friend knew I needed help. Every time I saw him, they would ask me, have you tried calling someone yet? Can I give you a phone number to someone you can call? I want you to get some help. It took several months of them nagging me over and over and over again to actually reach out and get some help. I was too prideful to admit I needed the help. I was afraid they would put me on a bunch of prescription medications that would make me snap like what happened to my father. But finally I reached out to the vet center and they got me set up with a counselor named Nick. I don't like being told what to do. I never have. That's why I became a realtor, so that I could be my own boss without having to answer to anyone but myself. I was afraid of the counselor, thinking he was going to tell me what to do or other things. I didn't know what to expect. But after my first meeting with Nick, I felt great. He never really told me anything in particular that I needed to do or change. He just listened to what I had to say, asked me more questions that would lead me to find the answers on my own. It took several years talking with Nick, but I was able to keep my good coping mechanisms like the gym, work, and get rid of my bad ones. I spent a lot of time at work, a lot of time in the gym, and a lot of time talking to Nick. I finally feel free of pain. Of course, I still miss, all 3 of them, but I finally feel okay with myself and with what I have done with my life and will continue to do. I absolutely love what I do. I've exceeded my business goals with my real estate business. I've bought my dream house, my dream car, and I've even found love once again. It's something I knew that I wanted to do, but I never thought I'd be emotionally capable to handle it. Going to get some help was the best thing I've ever done for myself. Don't be afraid to admit you're not strong enough on your own to pull yourself out of the pain you're feeling. Thank you.